very briefly, just for fun, I'm going to give you a little mini lecture on something in just a few minutes. Stay with me here. You have all been affected by Martin Luther. You know who he is. Yes. Even if you don't, it doesn't matter. You've been influenced by him. Or infected, either one. Martin Luther changed the way we read the New Testament. He and his followers and people who were... Okay. Martin Luther lived in the 16th century, 1500s. He's considered the founder of the Reformation, people who broke off from the Roman Catholics. Martin Luther, who was a Catholic, who didn't really mean to start a new thing called Protestantism, but he protested the Protestants, that's where it comes from. He protested various Roman Catholic theology, beliefs, and practices. He struggled with terrible depression. He used to practice self-flagellation and he beat himself badly. And his abbot, his main father, said, "You need to go do somewhere else. This is too much." He becomes a professor. He learns all of his Greek, his Hebrew, and Latin, reads the Bible in its original languages, and goes, "Oh my goodness, my church has been doing all kinds of stuff forever. I've been teaching that is nowhere in the Bible. That should bother us." And he writes up 95 things that the Roman Catholics are doing, and he wants to have a discussion about it. And one way that you know you want to have a discussion on theological issues back then is you write them down and you nail them to the door. And it's a way of saying, "Hey, let's have a talk." It's kind of like now we send out an email, we have an emergency meeting or whatever. Well, he nailed it to the church of Wittenberg, and it was called the 95 Theses. 95 things the Bible doesn't say or support. Things like when the coins hit the inside of basically the collection plate, it doesn't mean a soul left purgatory. The assumption is that's what they were teaching. When you give money, it goes, ting, a soul left purgatory. And he goes on and on and on and on. Well, he didn't mean to, but he lit a match to a powder keg. And all over England, there was already some protest, but no one had really hit it. And when he did, that just lit it. And all over England, people protested. I'm going somewhere with that. That's Martin Luther. That's a little cliff note. There's more to it. You can go read all kinds of good literature. My next thing is, when he read Paul in the New Testament, and Paul spoke about works or works of the law, for him, Paul was fighting against Roman Catholic theology and practice. So Paul wasn't talking to Jews and Jewish practices. He was fighting against Roman Catholic practices and their works of the law. So Paul, all of a sudden, sounded a whole lot like Martin Luther. Do you see what he's done? He's ripped it way out of context. So Paul, 2,000 years ago, well, for his time, 1,500 years back then, now that's all Paul is fighting his battles. And first century Pharisees really are like the Roman Catholic priests. So his modern beliefs and fight, he reads back into the New Testament. When he did that, he radically rewrote what we think about how we understood the New Testament. So for him, looking back, now the Jews are all legalists, trying to earn their way and give gifts to their way for salvation. When his mind, of course, that's what Roman Catholics were doing. So the Jewish opponents that the Apostle Paul faced and Jesus faced sure act a whole lot like the Roman Catholic people he was opposed to. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? So because of that, his interpreters forever have been teaching and preaching forever that what Jesus was really fighting was good old-fashioned legalism. And Jews are trying to earn their way to heaven. And all this works of the law that the Apostle Paul talks about in his letters, not against works. It's not about works, but about grace. Grace alone, not about works you were saved, and on and on. Martin Luther said it's just like his Roman Catholic opponents. That was the dominant view in Protestant circles since then. I mean, really, some hints against it came up in 18th century New Testament scholarship. But it was a guy named Kirster Stendahl at Harvard Divinity School. It was the dean. He wrote a little book that really started challenging that view. That maybe we've been reading Paul wrong all these years, and we're reading it through the lens of Luther. And then that really started New Testament scholars thinking. That was back in the mid-70s, I think, mid-late 70s. And then not long, or early 70s, right after that, a New Testament scholar, I think from Oxford, named E.P. Sanders, wrote a book that changed everything. And he took this view head on and radically changed the face of New Testament scholarship. And his number one thesis is, we've been misreading the New Testament ever since Martin Luther. Works of the law have nothing to do with Jews trying to earn their way to heaven. Instead, when Paul's opposing works or works of the law, it's not that they're trying to earn their way to heaven. Instead, what he's talking about is things that Jews did that demarcated themselves, delineated, distinguished themselves from the Gentiles. Those things he opposed. So, for example, there are 3 biggies that E.P. Sanders and all of his ilk since then have been saying. 3 big things that a Jew did to show, I'm a Jew. You're a Gentile, you're not. 3 biggies. For example, I'm married, I wear a wedding ring, and I have Elaine would have a wedding ring, my last name, and pick 2 or 3 big things, and she lives with me in this house, and we have the same children. Things that show that she's my wife and she's not someone else's wife. The Jews, E.P. Sanders, others said 3 big things. 1, circumcision. Now, in the ancient world, people all got circumcised. By the time of Jesus' time and Paul, everyone did it. Only the Jews did, as far as I remember. That's the thing that makes us different from you dirty Gentiles. You don't get circumcised. 2, we don't eat food like you do. We have a very specific diet program called Weight Watchers. And it's called, the Hebrew for that is called kashrut, dietary restrictions. We don't eat pork. We don't eat ham. We don't hang out with people who do. We don't eat shellfish. We don't eat this. We don't eat that. So I can spot you coming from a mile away, you Gentile, because you smell different from us, literally. You smell differently because of the food you eat and the things you drink. So we are circumcised and you're not. We eat food you don't. And 3, we have holy days, hence the word holiday, that you don't have. We celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the New Year. We celebrate Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. We celebrate Pasach, or Passover. We have a bunch of holy days you don't celebrate. E.P. Sanders and others said that's what Paul meant when he said works or works of the law. Things that demonstrate they're a Jew, not a Gentile. And in the first century, he argues, there was a large movement within Judaism that used those 3 things as like a merit badge, like a wedding ring. These are signs. We have a covenant and you don't. Ha, 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 ha. And listen, we're resting on these laurels. These 3 things demonstrates we made it into the people of God. And E.P. Sanders others said that's what he's opposing. That Jews didn't think they were earning anything or trying to be saved that way. They're just proud of their 3 big things they do. Now, that is called the New Pauline perspective. And it took me until my PhD to learn what I just said, which is a shame. It was ridiculous. And I was mad. Why didn't he tell me? Okay, but now I just told you in a nutshell what it is. So today in New Testament studies, here's my so what. One is, if that's true, it means we've all been influenced by a Lutheran kind of reading of the Bible. That might not be right. Now, you can make up your mind. I can send you all kinds of literature. You can watch videos on this. I can give you, and you can make up your own mind if you find that compelling. Because it's not the view. It's not the consensus view. But there's a large majority of New Testament scholars who think E.P. Sanders and a guy named James Dunn, N.T. Wright, that they're right. That they have nailed it, that we've misread them. There's a small, I think it's smaller, maybe half and half, maybe like 40% maybe, is what we call the traditional view. That's more like Luther got it right. So it's not the dominant, but it is more and more growing to be the majority view. I think that's safe to say. Here's my so what. I'm telling you, my forecast, you will never hear a preacher or teacher the rest of your entire lives, unless someone has been trained in New Testament Pauline perspective stuff, who will say what I just said. They will only solely present what's called the Lutheran view of the study. So anybody besides me, because I think the New Testament, I think what I presented is right. I think E.P. Sanders is correct. In general, I do think there were Jews of his time that thought doing the laws secured something for them. I do think a group of them. I don't think in general they did. I think in general Jews thought the law was a gift. It's like Elaine coming up and say, I will let you marry me. And I go, thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's a ring. Take my name. I'll move in with you. I go, oh, wonderful. But I don't earn it. I think in general that's exactly how the Jews thought about the law, that they were not earning anything. Read Psalm 119. It is full of, I delight in your commandments. I delight in your ways. By the way, that's the big chunk of Psalm 119 I put on those devotionals at church. That's from on that little, not devotional, but the little thing you can write in. That's from Psalm 119. Because I think it's an Old New Testament concept that we delight in we love it. We love his rules. Okay, when you hear Bible teacher now, they're going to preach from the Pharisees and say it's Jesus versus the legalist. Legalism versus grace. I mean, I hear, yeah, see him, sister, that's right, shaking her head, nodding. And that's exactly what we've always heard. That might be right, or they might be dead wrong, and that's not what they were talking about. Okay, I said all that to say this, back to my handout, on the bottom of page 20. That Israelites, at minimum, did not consider the law to be a means of salvation. The law represented the terms of loyalty or the covenant that Israel had with God. Remember, God initiated a relationship with Israel out of his grace, not because he needed the Israelites to earn his love. I give this analogy all the time when I'm sharing the gospel, right? Just the other day with Chelsea, I was saying this. Just the other day, I don't act married to earn my marriage. Elaine did not say on my wedding day, okay, if we make it in 80 years, I'll decide whether or not you earn the ring to wear. Praise God, she didn't say that. And nor did I say it to her. That day we got married. Why am I faithful just to her? Why do I do things for her and to her that I would not do to any other woman? Is it I'm trying to earn my marriage? Never in a million years. I'm doing it because I am married. I am married. So the typical assumption nowadays, most New Testament scholars would say, and Old Testament scholars too, by the way, Old Testament, that the Jews were not obeying the laws to earn their marriage with God or their covenant with God or to be saved. It's not a means of salvation. They're obeying the laws because they were in a relationship with God. They're showing faithfulness, fidelity, or I say here they do loyalty. I'm showing I'm loyal. That's why I obey the laws. Not so that one day down the road I might earn a covenant with God. They already had it. One more thing. I'm convinced that's compelling. Secondly, I think it makes the most sense out of most of the data. I think that's exactly what Jesus and Paul have to counter. Read Paul says in Romans 4. Basically, you can't just say Abraham is our father. That doesn't cut it. Because they're not trying to earn, well, I'm not going to get judged by God. Why? Because God gave a wedding ring to my ancestor, and I'm in. I'm married. I was born married. And Paul has to counter that. He's not countering they're trying to earn salvation. He's trying to counter them saying, I'm secure. I'm fine. I'm cool. Because I'm already married. I was born into my marriage. That is to say, I was born into the ancestry of Abraham and the covenants. So that's why you can read all through the Old Testament where they are delighted in the law. They think it's spectacular. And I'll stop there and then I tell you what, while you're ruminating on that, let me finish the last thing and then we're done. And we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. Last thing is this. Like with the Hebrew narrative, we should always ask of the laws, what does this tell me about God and what he's doing in history? All right? So, for example, Deuteronomy 15:12. Deuteronomy 15:12. Deuteronomy 15:12, he says, if your fellow Hebrew, whether male or female, is sold to you and serves you for 6 years, then in the 7th year you must let that servant go free. If you set them free, you must not send them away empty-handed. You must supply them generously from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. As Yahweh your God has blessed you, you must give to them. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this thing today. People, 99.9% of the time in the Old Testament era, when you were sold into slavery, it's for debt. You wanted to sell yourself into slavery or your children. If we got dirt broke, they don't have a 401k, they don't have Medicare, they don't have Obamacare, they are destitute. And one of the ways out of complete destitution is to sell your children into debt slavery so they can have a life and make it. And then eventually, after 6 years, no matter what, they got to be let go. They might want to stick around. And in the Old Testament it says that. If they want to stick around, you like it, hang out. You might even marry the master's kids and grow up and be with them.
Even your given properties were treated technically the same way.
get given property?
Yeah, what the Israelites were given from the beginning.
Yeah.
You never really got rid of that property.
On the 50-year Jubilee.
It would always, the Jubilee.
Oh, right. Even the year. That's right. So if you lost.
Bring it back to you.
That's
so
right.
Everything was, if you're in trouble, we can give you a loan for this.
That's right. That's right.
We can't, keep it away from you.
That's right.
It was rightfully given to you by God.
That's it. That's right. So even the land is, that's right. God gave the land. And so if I got into debt and I couldn't pay off this house, which praise God, hopefully I can one day to the bank who owns it, and they say it's mine, that own land, and I go under foreclosure, and I have to sell myself to you and Kathy, who own the land, and I have to work for you, eventually I get the land back. I can't stay a debt slave forever. Nobody did that from my awareness anywhere in the Old Testament world. But when you read that out of context, you go, man, there was slavery left and right. They supported, it was their way to help destitute. Think if the Indian culture had done that. The outcasts and pariahs. It is illegal for them to eat on solid plates. They have to eat on broken, shattered glass. They sit in their own excrement. They're poor of the poor of the poor of the poor. There is no welfare for them. Why? It's karma. Stinks for you. You should have been horrible in the life before. Jews would never have allowed that. That's what a threshing for. If you go out and say you get the corn and you harvest it and some corn falls down, all the poor were allowed to go through all your field. If it's on the ground, eat whatever they want all the time. It's a welfare system. So all that to say, things like this, what do you learn about things like that? We don't do that today in Deuteronomy 15, but what does it tell you about God that he commanded them to do this kind of thing?
He's loving.
I think
he
it's
provides for everyone.
Provides for them, loving. I agree. I think it's a very loving thing to do.
Very particular too. Precise.
Mm.
Everything there's a purpose for everything.
Mm-hmm. He's very loving and kind to those people to help them, to help the poor. Just because of time, we won't read more, but I say at the end of the outline, I hope you'll go back in your book, page, I think it's 185, 186, whatever the end of the chapter is. He gives some summary examples, and you can read that.
Protection. He protects.
He protects.
The outcast, the lowly.
Yep. That's right.
That they wouldn't be taken advantage of.
Even the foreigner. Ancient people did not talk that way. They did not talk that way. You didn't protect the foreigner the way the Jews did. Ever. And maybe one time on Wednesday night for the church-wide study, I want to do like a hot topics and do one on slavery and divorce and sexuality and all that stuff. And slavery, almost everybody completely misreads that. Completely. It was illegal to kidnap in ancient Judaism. Illegal. You could not do that. And if you had sanctuary cities, like now, back then, if a slave were set free, see in the antebellum South, it was illegal to keep the slave. If you ran away to someone else's home, you had to send him back, or you could be killed or outlawed or illegal, whatever. And not in Judaism. You were bound to keep them. I mean, if they ran away, something was bad. They don't want masters hurting them. I mean, on and on it goes. I agree. So protection's a big deal to God. Yeah. And we see that thing picked up in the New Testament, right? Jesus cares about it. There you go. The widow and the orphan. James said, I'll show you true religion, how you treat the widow and the orphan, the powerless. Well, that's right. Good. What questions do you have for me? Comments? Anything at all? Do you know what's going on in Galatians? Why he would say that?
Those Judaizers coming in, right?
Yeah, there were Jewish Christians, so Jews who believed Jesus was Messiah. That one group believed that if a Gentile was to be a Christian, and there were Gentile Christians in that congregation, they had to be circumcised. One of the works of the law are signs you're a believer. And they were going out saying to these Gentile Christians, when Paul left, you're not really in yet. You got to get circumcised. And that's why he's pretty bothered by that. So much he says, I wish they would go, do you see the verse right not too long before it? Yeah, emasculate, castrate themselves. He's overwhelmingly upset by that because
Tell us how you really feel.
that's exactly right. Tell us how really, that's exactly what he says. He's very, very upset about that. Then he goes on to say that you were called to freedom. Of course, freedom means you're not free to do those things you used to have to do to show you're in the people of God. And for him, that's an unloving thing to do, to make a person do what the law no longer requires you to do, because Jesus has come. It's unloving. In fact, you're supposed to love them. That's how the whole law is summed up. So for him, it's unloving to put another yoke upon their neck, another thing they got to do to being the people of God. For Paul says, no, you don't. Only one thing, and that's Jesus.
Well, that's why Paul was called back to be with the apostles to argue that very point.
That's in Acts 15:1. Yeah, you need to read Acts 15. It's, oh my
What
goodness.
was interesting was that at that point, on his own way there. So,
Yeah, that's right. It's so. I just recorded a podcast yesterday. I'm responding to this a blog came 2 years ago of a former pastor said the 8 things your pastor will never tell you, or secrets your pastor. And I thought, let's see what they are. These are earth shattering. So I'm going one by one and responding to all of them. And I got to 2 and finished that podcast. And the second one was about. It was the first one. Maybe one of them. Maybe it was the second one. But how Jesus would never support the religion it is today because we preach to Gentiles. And I said I've argued that's completely not compelling to me. In his earthly ministry, he did not have a massive outreach to Gentiles, but he did do some to them. But his chief focus, as he says in Matthew, is to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Absolutely. But the earliest Jewish Christians sure thought he wanted them to preach to Gentiles because they kept doing it. In Acts 15, Peter stands up and says, gentlemen, you know God commissioned me to preach to the Gentiles. Well, that's what he says. And if you think Matthew 28 is historical, and some scholars don't, but when he says, now I say, go therefore into all the nations, the Gentiles.
take it to the ends.
So for where, if you might dismiss that as a skeptic, we didn't say that either. Okay, well then you have to explain why the earliest disciples of Jesus, those who knew the guy, as soon as his resurrection happened, go and tell Gentiles he's been raised from the dead. They thought God had commissioned them. And that's right. And because he commissioned them, I'm convinced, and many are, as they came to grips with the real depth of this Messiah event, what did it really mean that he's died for our sins? I think that took some time to reflect on. And the more and more they did, they realized that means circumcision is not binding on us anymore. It's not a sign of the law anymore. We're not the people of God by having Sabbath. We're not people of God by going to the temple. We're not people of God by doing X, Y, Z. We're just people of God if we follow Jesus.
And those very distinguishing walls that were set in
Those
place
distinguishing
slowly
walls.
being pulled away.
Yeah, I think so. That's why Paul called it his gospel.
Crucifixion.
And what's that, crucifixion?
I said like the curtain ripping.
Oh, like the curtain. Yeah, kind of like the curtain. Yeah, kind of like that. Good. What else?
Hard stuff, though, if you've been a Jew.
Oh, big
Yeah,
time.
I'm proud of that.
Absolutely. Just for the podcast, you said it was a hard stuff. Must have been hard stuff for the Jew. I can't imagine how difficult. When it really hit with me how what I think is an accurate reading of first century Judaism, I felt much more empathy for them. This was years ago in my studies. I thought, oh my goodness, if Paul, the Apostle Paul, showed up to your synagogue and said, Jesus, the one who's been killed, and everybody knows from Deuteronomy 21, if you die, you're cursed. Oh, that guy really is the risen Messiah, and circumcision doesn't matter anymore for the. I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah. You talk about radical. I agree. And that's why Paul says, he's fighting this in Philippians 3, he says, you want to be a Jew? I'm a Jew. I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Born a Pharisee. Tribe of Benjamin, son. He's showing his resume and said, this is all refuse. He used a different word in Greek. It's junk compared to knowing the Christ Jesus. So the resume he gives, I'm convinced, would have been typical rabbinic resume of credentials of who's the most thoroughgoing Jew. It's like what people in church, I've been here 58 years. I've been here for 70 years. I've been whatever. But that's what Paul did. It says, and now that is worth, that must have been, to me, outside of a revelation of Jesus himself. I don't know how to explain how the Apostle Paul would have changed his views so much. I don't know how he done it. In Acts 15, it says, and a group from the Pharisees stood up and said that you have to have circumcision. But they're Christians. They're Christians who are Pharisees who believe you have to be circumcised. So I always ask, we don't hear that preacher taught much anymore. It says in Acts 15. But I always think, man, what must have taken for these Pharisees to change their mind? I don't think it was just the same Pharisees that always opposed Jesus if they were Judean, not Galilean. But still, they had to have seen something, experienced something to be changed. That'd be a big deal.